Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Surprise treat for the devotees, I guess. Mother Malati, before she heads back on the road trip, I requested if she would narrate the pastime by which Kishori manifested. Because she is the person who actually purchased the deities, Prabhupada had written to her, and because she bought them, Kishori manifested and somehow come to Chicago. And since this is the 40th year, I requested her and she's very kindly agreed. So a little Kishori Katha is how they manifested before we start the class.
I'm not giving the class, I'm just going to say something.
Yes. And take your time, no rush.
It's okay, sure. Hare Krishna, good morning. Please excuse my casual form of dress, but I'm actually on my way driving back to New Vrindavan, so it's kind of my traveling clothes. But I didn't want to leave Chicago without taking the sacred darshan of Kishori. Oh, Hare Krishna, thank you. Now I'm really getting their mercy. Yes. So this year has been a notable year for many deities in ISKCON. 40th year anniversaries. So next week will be the 40th year anniversary of the installation of Radha Kunja Bihari. It was the 40th year installation of Radha Kishore Gopinath in Toronto, and also Radha Kalachandji. So there's a connection between those three deities and Kishori, and I'll explain what that is. I was traveling in India with another young devotee. At the time we were young devotees. That is no longer a fact. But it's in an area very noted for marble, a town nearby called Murti Wallahs, people that carve deities, have their shops. So for us, it was very thrilling, two young Western ladies going to this beautiful town. And by the way, that's not the only wonderful thing about Jaipur. The most wonderful thing is the presence of Sri Sri Radha Govinda. After they were evacuated from Vrindavan, they were taken up, they took their residence in Jaipur, and until this day have the most very wonderful worship. So, all in all, Jaipur was just a very, very deep impression in my Krishna consciousness. We were taking this service very seriously, and we were going from shop to shop looking. We really didn't know anything, what to look for, but Radha and Krishna. And there was all other kinds of murtis being carved, not just Radha and Krishna. Some were demigods, and some were just commercial figures of maybe a politician or something like that. But by and large, most of the deities that were being carved had something to do with the spiritual world, or at least, as I said, the demigods. So it was very interesting, on the one hand, to be shopping for Radha and Krishna. Prabhupada had already told us you can't purchase a ticket to go to Vrindavan, so how could you possibly purchase Radha and Krishna? We found, it's not like you go and there's these, sets of deities just ready to go. I mean, here and there you'll find what you could say quick sale. Somebody, like, usually there'll be some well-off grihastha couple, and they come and they want to buy deities right there on the spot and take them home. And so, quick sale, they're of a certain size, not too big. And but we knew these are going in our temple, and they had to be a little larger. And each one, they had to be a little special, so that when you would see them, you would recognize their faces, and you would know, oh, this is so-and-so, this is so-and-so. Just like Radha Landanishwara, this is Radha Landanishwara. You don't get confused about, maybe it's this one, maybe it's that one, or Radha Govinda in New York. So we found the two sets for Toronto and for Detroit. Then, as we were just finishing up business with this one person who was not one of the big shop owners, his was like a little shop. And, one little light bulb dangling from the ceiling, nothing fancy at all. There was not even a display area, just where he was working, and then the finished deities would be there. Just when we were going to finish up our business, for some reason I looked behind a door that was going out into a little courtyard area. And behind that door was a very large form of Krishna, black marble. The other two that we purchased were white marble Krishna. And this deity was like in the very traditional old style where Krishna is really curved and he has kind of a largish head. So immediately Srimati said, oh, we'll get this for Dallas, because at the time we had a school there, and she was thinking how the children would just be so much in awe and so delighted by this beautiful big form of Krishna. So even though at that point we had not been asked to get deities for Dallas, nonetheless those deities were purchased. So the 3 sets of deities were carefully wrapped. This was something that I would do personally, because in other instances the deities had been broken during shipping. So I'd been taught how to wrap their arms and legs or different parts of their body with extra padding to make sure that hopefully nothing would happen during the transportation. Just finished that and about to go. And all of a sudden, a telegram came addressed to me. So I don't know if you all know what telegrams are, because I think they're pretty obsolete nowadays. I think they don't even do them anymore. So telegrams were like little yellow pieces of paper that were electronically conveyed from one place to the other. And they'd be printed out, and somebody would knock on your door, a Western Union person, and hand you this telegram. So I was really surprised. It was my first and only telegram I'd ever gotten. And I looked, and it was from Srila Prabhupada. And he said, "Bring Radha Krishna deities large." A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. Now, we were just leaving. We had our tickets to go, our train tickets, and, weren't sure what to do. But I said, I'll stay. And I had my daughter with me. I'll stay. And Srimati went with the other deities. So I was there with my daughter, and then I started thinking, well, I hope this is not going to be too difficult, because, as I said, they're not like you're just going to go find Radha and Krishna ready to go. And, even if you find them, usually they would have to be repainted, or, certain details would have to be addressed. And then, of course, in India, the financial negotiation part. So, which generally was a polite fight. So, somehow or other, just Krishna wanted to manifest himself on that, because I quickly found a set of deities. And completed the negotiation, got the deities packaged up, and then I had to get them to Bombay. So, I made that arrangement, but that left me without a ticket to, I didn't have a train ticket anymore, it had expired. So I requested if I could drive with this trucker. I don't know if you know those big lorries in India, those, colorful, big, bright. So he agreed that I could come, my daughter and myself. They were leaving in the evening. And it was quite interesting, because there was the driver, and then the driver had about 2 or 3 friends, and it was so packed with me and my daughter up there. This is all they don't have any back seat. Now they have like more larger, nicer types of situations, but this was just back in, 40 years ago. So one seat in the front. There was one guy, in India they drive on the other side, so the driver is on, your right side, not over where we sit. So he's on his side. He had another fellow sitting in between him and the door, squished there. Then there was, me and my daughter and 2 other guys. We're all squished, into the front part of this lorry. And this set of Radha and Krishna, along with all the other cargo, was in the back. So my destination was Juhu. And at that time, Juhu was tent city. It looked like a refugee camp. And we definitely felt like refugees there, refugees from the material world. But it was pretty basic. There was a program being arranged for Srila Prabhupada in town, in Bombay City. And this was the second large program. We would call them Pandal programs. So it was the second large Pandal program. And when I arrived in Juhu, it was early morning, and the devotees had no idea that I was coming, and no idea that I was bringing these 2 big, huge boxes. So that was a little surprise, but very quickly a phone call came, and Srila Prabhupada said he wanted the deities to be brought into Bombay. He was staying in Bombay because there was not really a decent place for him there, and the program was starting. They were getting ready for that program. And at the time, my husband Shamsundar was his secretary. So the deities were carefully opened up, and that was another part that I would be present for, because sometimes they would survive the journey, and then when they would use a crowbar to pull the wood crates open, the pressure of the crowbar would crack the deities. So all these was done very carefully. Deities were fine, no problem. And I was put in the back of an old taxi cab, which was the conveyance they had at that time. And the driver's name was Mahamsa. He was a devotee that had come from a Parsi family. And so he was the driver. I was in the back, and then with my daughter, and then these two deities, one on each side. So I was in the middle. Radha was on one side, Krishna was on the other. And there was this kind of plexiglass partition in between the driver and myself and the deities. And this way we traveled to Bombay to see Face Park, where Srila Prabhupada was staying at the flat of one of our life members' homes. What happened is that life member had a brother who had recently expired, as they say in India, and it was vacant, except for the furniture, of course. So we were brought up the elevator and came into the flat, and we brought the deities into what you would call the living room. And the living room was piled with all kinds of furniture because we didn't use all, and like Prabhupada didn't have any need for extra furniture in his quarters. He just needed a small desk, a sit-down desk, and something to sleep on. So anything that was extra was piled in the living room. And his servants and secretaries, we didn't sleep on beds in those days. We were hardcore Hare Krishnas. So all the furniture was just in this room, and there was Radha and Krishna standing there. And Prabhupada had the master bedroom suite, and there was a door into his room to that room. So he came through the door, and I was standing there, and he said, "Bring them." And he wanted them in his room. And he wanted them right in front of his desk. So once they were situated there, he was looking and he smiled. He said, "Hold out your hand." So I held out my hand. I didn't know what was going to happen. He said, "Hold out your hand." And he took a ring off of his finger and he dropped it into my hand. He said, "See if it fits." He immediately liked the set of deities very much. And the young ladies that had to measure them and sew for them were, like this, because they were right in front of, they were used to working in, like a pujari room, and how the pujari room was Srila Prabhupada's room. So they graced the second pandal. And after the pandal program, a few days was over, I was told to pack them again. And at the time, I had done this previously for other deities, and once it was done, I wasn't thinking so much about what was going to happen, so I packed them. And for some reason, I thought I had heard they were going to Mexico City. So for years I was thinking that they had gone to Mexico City, but I hadn't seen pictures of the deities, so, it was just something that I thought. And I happened to be talking to Giriraj Swami one day, and the topic came up, and he pointed out that they weren't in Mexico City, they were in Chicago. And he said, look at the picture. And I said, "Oh my God, that's them." So it was with great pleasure that Kishore Kishori were those same deities, because that meant that I would be able to see them sometimes. I only went to Mexico City for the first time last year. But I've been able to come and take the darshan of Kishore Kishori many times over the years after I returned to USA. And of course, everybody's heard the story that why is Krishna's name first? It's generally Radha Krishna, Rukmini Dwarkadish, Radha Gokulananda. And Prabhupada's beautifully framed answer, his reply was, we've saved the best for last. So, for my personal observation, one reason I'm very delighted to take darshan of Kishore Kishori is, of course, the remembrance of that time with Srila Prabhupada and his pleasure in taking darshan for the first time of their beautiful forms. So that is always present when I see them, as the remembrance of Srila Prabhupada. And also because throughout the years, somehow or other, this temple has managed to keep their faces and their features practically the same. This is, for me, something very wonderful, because many temples have dramatically changed the form of the deity's eyes, the mouth. This is something that's actually not supposed to happen. That Srila Prabhupada's instruction on this matter is to never change the deity's features. Like you may think, oh, you want great big eyes in Radharani, but she didn't come with these great big eyes. She came with the eyes she had. It's like having a baby, and then you look at your baby and you say, I'd rather it looks like this, and then put it in for plastic surgery to change the baby's face. It's just not done. So I'm always so happy when I see their beautiful faces and that they have remained the same. So this is a very great credit to the many wonderful devotees who have served them personally and taken the care to ensure that they always remain the same. Eternally Radha and Krishna, Kishore Kishori. So, thank you very much. Yeah. I want to thank you all, and it's so nice to see. Yes? It is so nice to see such a joyful crowd of devotees in the morning during greeting of the deities. And I hope that this joyful crowd of devotees keeps expanding, because this is a nice big temple room. It can hold a lot of devotees. But, you have a wonderful reason to be here, Kishore Kishori, with Srila Prabhupada's direct presence, a wonderful temple president and his wife to guide you. So I hope that the number of devotees keeps expanding. Yeah.
Kishore, they have clothes underneath their dress.
The what?
I've heard that Kishore actually have a dress underneath, like the
Yes.
dress that we dress them on. I mean, I don't know because I don't go on the altar. Was that unusual when you first saw that?
That was quite common. Many of the deities have clothes on, and actually they shouldn't be without any clothes. It can be various levels of clothing, but you don't want in other words, a nude form of Radharani would not be appropriate, for example, or a nude form of Krishna. So some little covering is always included, or should be included in the carving. Later on, starting basically with Krishna Balaram Temple, at that point we started doing customized carving, which meant instead of getting deities that had already previously been carved, we would place an order, we would show diagrams, how we wanted the deities to look, how the hands should be, what type of faces, etc. Jamuna was the first devotee to establish that when she placed the orders for Krishna Balaram and Radha Shamsundar. So previously to that, all the deities basically had some kind of dress on. I think maybe the first one not to have a dress was Radha Govinda. And Radha Govinda was present at the program in 1972 held in Jaipur, an outdoor Pandal program. And he has some, short little briefs. But Radharani was fully dressed, and in fact she had a lotus flower in her hand, which is also very common for many of the early deities. And crown on the head, mukut. Now in that case, before the installation, the devotees decided to modify this, the murti. They wanted to remove the lotus flower and smooth the crown down. And they did something like that, but Srila Prabhupada was really distressed. He didn't approve of this at all. He didn't want the deities being changed. In Dallas, when they went to install Kalachandji, he almost didn't do it, because right before the installation, somebody repainted the eyes and reshaped them. So even before installation, he didn't want the deities being tampered with, what to speak of after the installation, because the whole installation is to accept the presence of Krishna into the form of the deity so that he can be worshipped. So just the idea of changing, Krishna, you don't look quite right. Let me see if I can make you look better. It's just not appropriate. But some temples are doing this, and I'm just happy that you're not. Yeah.
First of all, it's so nice that you could come and give us your association and speak about Kishore Kishori. This is really a special treat for us.
For me too.
I heard like this, but I'm not sure if it is true, that in the sets of deities that went to, I think, Detroit and Dallas.
You're talking about the switch?
The Radharanis got switched?
What happened is that they arrived in, wherever they first arrived, I'm not quite sure. And the temple president for Detroit was the one who went through the customs formalities. So he got to see all of them before anybody else saw them. So he took, somehow or other, he took the Radharani that was intended for Kalachandji for the Detroit deity, for Kunja Bihari. And it was kind of interesting because Kalachandji is much bigger than the other, than the other deities. Kunja Bihari is a large size. I mean, this was considered large size in those, when Prabhupada said large. So he's about 42 inches, something like that. It was large. The deities in Toronto are a little smaller. But, Kalachandji was big, so the Radharani was of a also large size. Like I say, once the deities were shipped out, I usually didn't see them, especially at that time I was in India or Europe. I wasn't traveling to America. So I remember the first time I went to Detroit was in 92. And I looked at those deities, and right away I said, that's Kalachandji's deity, Radharani. What is she doing here? I mean, because she was so distinct. But anyway, somehow she wanted to be in Detroit. And she's not bigger than Krishna. She's just, she's big. And then for Kalachandji, Radharani is a little more petite, but that's also very sweet. If you see some of the deities of the Goswamis, Radharani is quite smaller than Krishna, maybe just to the shoulder or so, sometimes even a little less. So that was all right. But I was surprised that I could even, that after all those years, and I immediately understood that, This is Kalachandji's Radharani. It doesn't have anything to do with it, but it just shows how Krishna has his own sweet will. At one point in Montreal, there was a small set of Radha and Krishna. And there was one god sister who was very famous as a book distributor. Her name was Labangalatik. And she had a small son who's Prabhupada called Dwarkanath, Dwarkadish. And Srila Prabhupada was very fond of this young boy. So she was in Montreal, and she left Montreal and she went to Toronto. And when she left Montreal to go to Toronto, she took with her the small set of Radha and Krishna deities. So the devotees were shocked, like, what do we do? How could she have even done this, And she did it because her son was very attached to them. So they wrote to Prabhupada, what do we do? The deities have been moved. And they were expecting an outraged answer because, the deities were moved. Can you imagine if you came and, okay, they moved today, but they just moved to a swing, but, if they weren't there. Srila Prabhupada's answer was really interesting. He said, Krishna must have wanted to go to Toronto. Since he wanted to go to Toronto, he may stay there. So the pure devotee always has a pure vision, but we can't ever imitate it. And so best, especially in deity worship, to really become familiar with his instructions and follow them closely. And then you know that you'll be pleasing Krishna, which is the object of our life, and certainly the object of deity worship.
I read an article in BTG that Radha Ras Bihari and Kishore Kishori Pran Pratishtha was done together.
The what?
They were both done in a Jew temple.
They were...
Radha Ras Bihari and Kishore Kishori Pran Pratishtha was done by Prabhupada in Jew. Is it right?
The deities, two sets, Radha Ras Bihari and Kishore Kishori, that they were installed in Jew by Srila Prabhupada.
And Kishore Kishori was sent here, Chicago.
I don't know about the installation part because I packed the deities at the Pandal. So I can't comment on that if something happened after I packed them or not. I wasn't staying in Bombay. I did my service and left. I would just find it a little strange that they would be unpacked, but it could have been. Ras Bihari was at the first Pandal, and of course he stayed in Bombay. But he had already been worshipped. He was in our place at Akashganga, which was the first established residence we had in Bombay. And it was on the 7th floor of an apartment building. So then he was worshipped in that place, and then of course famously he was transferred to Juhu during a time of upheaval when Prabhupada said, bring the deities. So in that way, because at least in that time still, once a deity was there, it would be respected. That's why in old Bombay there's many roads where right in the middle of the road there's a little temple, and the road goes around the little temple. It might be just a little temple, not much larger than this, asan or Prabhupada's Vyasasan. But the road will go around it, So you can't disturb the deities, so bring the deities, But of course those people were so antagonistic that they came to attack anyway, and they were trying to tear down the deity house, which was really nothing more than some corrugated iron, that corrugated construction material. And one devotee, Maitahili Devi Dasi, she was the only one who stood up to the police. Physically, she was kind of a big person too. And her name was Matahili. We used to call her Mighty Healy. But she physically stood up to the police, and they knocked her down and dragged her away, and she just got back up and ran back. So I don't know about that. It could be, but unless they were installed before the Pandal program. Because generally what would happen, they were brought for the program, and if they hadn't been worshipped before, there was some little simple ceremony. I mean, nowadays there's 3-day ceremonies, 1-week ceremonies, but it was a little simpler at that point in time. So I can't directly answer yes or no.
Thank you. I joined in Washington, D.C. in Potomac, Radha, Madan, Mohan. I heard there was a story with the Radharani there. I wasn't sure if you were aware of it. It's a brass Radharani.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if you were familiar.
I don't know their story.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know. Actually, each deity is supposed to have a book. I can't remember the name, but telling all the different events and circumstances, kind of like a life history. And it's actually sad we haven't done this because there's some very ecstatic deity stories. And when those of us who know the stories kind of take our leave, the stories may go along with us. But some of them they're all wonderful actually. The life of the deity, the history, how the deity came to the particular place. Like when we got Kalachandji and all of these other deities, I got a small set of Radha and Krishna. It was a black Krishna and a beautiful white marble Radharani. And they were installed in Dallas. And then at one point, Satsvarup Maharaj, who had been in Dallas, came to Gitanagari, and he brought those small set. So for years and years, this small Kalachandji was in Gitanagari. And maybe 3 years ago or so, due to the decline in population in Gitanagari, they were struggling to maintain many sets of deities. So they contacted Dallas and they asked if the Chota Kalachandji could return to Dallas, which Dallas agreed. So now those deities are back in Dallas after probably almost 3 decades. So these little stories are there. Kind of, you see the deities are so personal that it's not just... they're not just there, but they have a history, they have stories behind them, and if you talk to the pujaris, you can find out a lot. There's many stories of deities where the pujari finds suddenly the clothes are too small. The clothes that they had been wearing are suddenly too small. They're not fitting the deities anymore, meaning the deities really like their prasadam. Prabhupada always wanted the attention being of any community to be the center of attention, to be the deities that were installed. Well, nowadays our communities are quite dispersed. In the old days we all lived in the temple under the same roof, for better or for worse. And nobody thought about having their own deities. We didn't need to, we would have. The deities were there. But as the population grew and then the congregation model came and people were living, many miles in some cases. Like in Detroit, many of the devotees live 40 to 45 miles away from Detroit. They don't even live in Detroit. So then it became natural. People started having home deities, But the home deities are the reflections, are the counterparts of the main deities that are established in the temple. So we should always keep that in mind and understand that whatever service is being offered to the deities in the temple can also be accepted by home deities. And I mentioned this because I've had experience where they'd be at the temple and all of a sudden, oh, I have to go. And it was like right in the middle of something. I said, well, where are you going? What are you doing? Oh, I have to go home and do my arti. I said, well, there's going to be arti here in a few minutes, but I have to go home and do my arti, So if you, get to the point where you're having home deities, you should keep in mind that the quality of home worship can never equal the temple worship. Prabhupada put that in very clearly in a letter to a couple who had professed they wanted to have first-class worship of Lord Jagannath, and Prabhupada said that you cannot do in your home. It requires men and money, it's like too much finance, too much. So he said, better that you follow the regulative principles and preach and go out and distribute my books. So that you can have Guru Gauranga altar, and anything that you offer or anything that you prepare in your home can be offered to them. So the home worship was meant to basically for grihastras, especially if they did not live near the temple, but it wasn't meant to be primary. It would be secondary to the worship of the deities in the temple. And of course, if you're living in a temple, then you have their wonderful, glorious lordships present, so then there's no need to have other sets of deities, And the other thing he cautioned about was keeping images of Krishna, like statues or deities, on a shelf somewhere, but not worshipping them. This cheapens deity worship. If people see that you have some forms of Krishna, but they're just on a shelf like a decoration, then what is the difference between that form and this form, So, of course, we understand the difference. This form has been purposely installed and worshipped. But then, why is that form just standing on a shelf? Why is that form? So then he discouraged not having forms of the deities that were not being worshipped on display. Not to do that. One other very nice feature of this temple is your beautiful garlands. So, all glories to the garland makers, and maybe some of you. I don't know who does them, but... Oh, okay. But always since I can remember, there have always been opulent, gorgeous flowers. And in his first letter about deity worship, which was written to Satsarup Adhikari at the time, Srila Prabhupada's... Srila Prabhupada, among the instructions he gave, that there should be sufficient opulent and gorgeous flowers. So, flowers are an important part of deity worship. But the most important items that Prabhupada stressed were punctuality and cleanliness. And the cleanliness is not just limited to the altar or the pujari room, but the general overall cleanliness of the facility. So that reflects upon our consciousness. So again, this temple is doing very nicely. Nice reflection on the consciousness. He also instructed that the prasadam should be, the bhog should be first class. Sometimes we get in a, kind of financial dilemma, and we'll start cutting out certain things, like flowers and bhoga for the deities. But better we cut out other things. Thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. All glories to Kishore Kishori. All glories to the assembled devotees.